"I've killed men with these hands," the Navy SEAL said, staring at Bruce Lee across the concrete floor. "Your movie tricks won't work on someone trained to actually end lives." Bruce Lee said nothing. He simply took his stance, relaxed, centered, impossibly calm. What happened in the next 11 seconds would remain classified for nearly 50 years. Only 8 men were present in the dimly lit gym on that classified California military base in February 1970. The air was thick with anticipation and the faint smell of canvas and old sweat. Overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor, and the space felt smaller than it was, compressed by the weight of what was about to happen. Bruce Lee stood near the center of the room, barefoot, wearing simple black pants and a white t-shirt. He was 30 years old, compact and wiry at 140 pounds, his movements economical even in stillness. His dark eyes scanned the room with calm calculation, taking in every detail. The positions of the officers, the medical equipment staged in the corner, the single exit, the temperature, the acoustic properties of the concrete walls. Across from him stood Chief Petty Officer John Morrison, 6'1", 200 pounds of battle-hardened muscle and combat experience. Morrison's shoulders were broad, his hands scarred and calloused from years of close quarters fighting in the jungles of Vietnam. He wore standard Navy PT gear, gray t-shirt, blue shorts, bare feet. His face was impassive, but his eyes carried the weight of things seen and done that most people couldn't imagine. Between them stood Commander Robert Jenkins, the senior officer present, a man whose career had been built on making hard decisions in impossible situations. Jenkins had organized this meeting, this test, this collision of worlds. Around the perimeter of the gym stood 6 other officers, captains, majors, a Marine colonel, all senior combat leaders with classified security clearances and a vested interest in what was about to unfold. And, standing slightly apart, medical bag at his feet, was Lieutenant Marcus Harris, a Navy corpsman with combat trauma experience. His presence was a reminder that what was about to happen wasn't a game. The man stood with the stillness of a trained fighter, weight balanced, eyes steady. No existencion, no performative aggression, just quiet readiness. Jenkins made introductions. "Mr. Lee, this is Chief Petty Officer John Morrison. Morrison is one of our top hand-to-hand combat instructors. 3 tours in Vietnam, extensive experience in close-quarters combat, multiple combat decorations. He'll be your sparring partner this evening." Morrison stepped forward, offered his hand. Bruce took it, and in that brief contact, he felt the man's conditioning, his controlled strength, his underlying wariness. "Mr. Lee," Morrison said. His voice was low, respectful, but direct. "I appreciate you coming out here, but I need to be straight with you. I've killed men with these hands. In tunnels, in villages, in the dark where you can't see 2 feet in front of you. What I do isn't sport fighting or movie choreography. It's survival. It's making sure the other guy stops moving so you can go home." He paused, measuring his words. "I don't doubt you're skilled. I've seen some of your demonstrations. Impressive. But I need to know if what you teach can work against someone who's trained to actually end lives. Not score points. Not look good on camera. Actually kill." The room went silent. The other officers shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the diplomatic tone they'd expected. But Morrison wasn't being disrespectful. He was being honest. And everyone in the room knew the question needed to be asked. Bruce studied Morrison for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. Not anger, not defensiveness, but a kind of deep recognition. He'd heard variations of this challenge before from boxers, wrestlers, street fighters, cops. The underlying question was always the same. Is your martial art real, or is it theater? "Understand," Bruce said quietly. "You want to know if philosophy and technique can stand up to experience and intention. That's a fair question." He stepped back slightly, assuming a loose, relaxed stance. His hands floated near his center line, not guarding, just present. His weight settled into his back leg, but loosely, ready to shift in any direction. "But let me ask you something," Bruce continued. "When you killed those men, what were you thinking?" Morrison frowned, caught off guard by the question. "I was thinking about survival, about getting home. About protecting my team. So you were thinking about yourself, Bruce said. Not accusatory, just observational. Your survival, your safety, your mission. That's natural. That's what your training conditioned you to do. But it also limits you. Limits me how? When you fight for yourself, you're fighting from fear. Fear of death, fear of failure, fear of pain. That fear creates tension. Tension slows you down, makes you predictable, burns energy. I can read that fear. I can use it against you. Morrison's jaw tightened. You're saying I fight scared? I'm saying you fight human, Bruce replied. We all do. But there's a state beyond fear, not fearlessness, which is just stupidity, but a kind of acceptance. When you accept that you might die, that you might lose, that you might be hurt, when you truly accept it, then you stop fighting against reality. You start flowing with it. And when you flow, you become very difficult to predict, very difficult to control, very difficult to defeat. He gestured toward the center of the gym. Show me your best technique. Whatever you would use if someone attacked you in the jungle. Don't hold back. I want to see what you actually do when your life depends on it. Morrison glanced at Commander Jenkins, who gave a slight nod. The rules of engagement were clear. Full contact, no protective gear, fight until submission or medical intervention. This was as close to real combat as they could simulate in a controlled environment. Morrison took a breath, centering himself. He'd been in this position hundreds of times, training scenarios, live combat demonstrations. He knew his body, knew his capabilities, knew what he could do to another human being if necessary. But something about Bruce's calm unsettled him. There was no aggression, no challenge, no ego, just presence. The officers around the perimeter leaned forward slightly, unconsciously. Lieutenant Harris's hand drifted toward his medical bag. The room seemed to contract, the air growing heavier. Morrison exploded forward. His movement was textbook military combatives, aggressive closing of distance, lead elbow strike aimed at Bruce's temple, rear hand ready to follow up, body weight driving forward to overwhelm through momentum and mass. The strike was fast, committed, meant to incapacitate immediately. Bruce wasn't there. Morrison's elbow cut through empty space. Bruce had shifted laterally, just enough to void the angle of attack, his body angled 45 degrees, hands still loose, still relaxed. Morrison's momentum carried him forward. He tried to adjust, throwing a rear straight punch where he anticipated Bruce would be. Bruce had already moved again, this time circling to Morrison's blind side. Morrison spun, tried to reacquire visual contact, throwing a hooking elbow as he turned, a technique designed to clear space and catch opponents trying to flank. Bruce ducked under it, so smoothly that it looked choreographed, and as Morrison's elbow whistled overhead, Bruce's hand snaked out and touched Morrison's throat. A light tap, barely contact, but the message was unmistakable. That could have been a crushing strike to the windpipe. Morrison backed off, resetting his stance, breathing harder now. 3 strikes, all committed, all empty. And Bruce had countered without countering. Just movement, position, a touch to demonstrate control. You're fast, Morrison said, trying to mask his frustration. You're predictable, Bruce replied, still calm. You're trained to close distance and finish quickly. That works against most opponents, people who panic when you press them. But I don't panic. So your aggression just gives me information. Every strike tells me about your timing, your range, your preferences. You're showing me your patterns. Morrison felt a cold realization settling into his chest. Bruce wasn't fighting him. Bruce was reading him. Like a book written in a language Morrison didn't know he was speaking. Try again, Bruce said. But this time, don't fight to win. Fight to understand. Morrison didn't fully comprehend what that meant, but he adjusted his approach. This time he didn't explode forward. He moved with more caution, hands up in a tight guard, advancing incrementally, looking for openings. He feinted a jab, watching for Bruce's reaction. Bruce didn't react, just observed, hands still low, still relaxed. Morrison committed to a 1-2 combination, jab, cross, solid boxing fundamentals. The jab was fast, meant to find range. The cross was the real weapon, thrown with full body rotation and power. Bruce's hand intercepted the jab before it extended, a pack saw that redirected it downward while simultaneously closing distance. Morrison's cross was already in motion, committed. Bruce slipped it by millimeters, his head moving just outside the line of attack, and his own rear hand extended in a straight blast, a punch that traveled maybe 14 inches total. The impact was precise. Bruce's fist struck Morrison's solar plexus, hitting the celiac plexus nerve cluster, a dense bundle of nerves that controls the diaphragm. The strike wasn't hard. Bruce pulled it significantly, but the placement was surgical. Morrison's body forgot how to breathe. His diaphragm spasmed, involuntarily contracting, and for a terrifying moment his lungs couldn't expand. He bent forward, gasping, hands instinctively going his stomach. That's when Bruce's second strike came, a light tap to Morrison's throat, the same spot he'd touched earlier, but this time with slightly more pressure. Morrison's hands flew to his neck, protective instinct overriding training. His guard dropped completely. Bruce's knee came up, not to Morrison's head, as would have been natural, but to his thigh, a strike to the common peroneal nerve that runs down the outside of the leg. Morrison's leg buckled. All his weight had been on that leg when the strike landed, and suddenly the leg stopped responding to commands. The muscle didn't hurt. It just stopped working. Morrison went down to one knee, still trying to catch his breath, his left leg numb and unresponsive, his hands halfway between defending his throat and checking his leg. 11 seconds had elapsed since Morrison threw his first punch. Lieutenant Harris started to move forward, but Commander Jenkins raised a hand, stopping him. Bruce had already stepped back, hands lowered, his breathing unchanged. He looked down at Morrison with neither triumph nor pity, just neutral observation. 3 strikes, Bruce said quietly. 3 different nerve clusters. Solar plexus stops breathing. Throat creates fear and defensive reaction. Leg removes base. Your body short circuits. It's not pain that puts you down, it's your nervous system betraying you. Against pain, you can fight through. Against systemic disruption, you can't. Morrison struggled to his feet, waving off Harris as the corpsman approached. His breathing was returning to normal, ragged but functional. His leg tingled painfully as feeling came back. But what bothered him most wasn't the physical sensation, it was the psychological one. He'd been completely controlled. Not beaten, controlled. Like a puppet whose strings had been cut one by one until he collapsed. And Bruce had done it without aggression, without anger, without even breathing hard. The other officers stood in stunned silence. They'd all expected Morrison to at least make it competitive. He was one of their best, combat-proven, highly trained, physically superior. And he'd been dismantled in 11 seconds by a man 60 pounds lighter who moved like he was practicing Tai Chi in a park. Commander Jenkins cleared his throat. "Mr. Lee, that was impressive. Extremely impressive. Morrison, you good?" Morrison nodded, still catching his breath. "I'm good, sir." Jenkins turned back to Bruce. "What you've just demonstrated is exactly what we need. The precision, the efficiency, the ability to neutralize a threat without excessive force. This is perfect for special operations work. We want to hire you, Mr. Lee. Develop a training program for our SEAL teams, Force Recon Marines, maybe eventually Delta and other special mission units. We're prepared to offer a very substantial contract." Bruce was quiet for a long moment, looking around the room at the assembled officers. They all looked at him with a mixture of respect and hunger. The hunger of warriors who just glimpsed a new level of capability and wanted to acquire it. "I appreciate the offer, Commander," Bruce said finally, "but I have to decline." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Jenkins's eyebrows rose. "May I ask why?" "This is an opportunity to serve your country, to save American lives, to make killers more efficient at killing." Bruce interrupted gently. "That's what you're asking me to do." "Mr. Lee, with respect," Jenkins said, his tone hardening slightly. "These men are already killers. That's their job. We're not asking you to corrupt them. We're asking you to make them more effective at their mission." "I understand," Bruce said, "and I respect their mission. Truly. But what I teach isn't about killing efficiently. It's about understanding violence so completely that you know when not to use it. He gestured toward Morrison, who was still recovering, leaning against a wall. I could have killed him just now, crushed his windpipe, ruptured his liver, destroyed his knee. I didn't, not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to. That choice, that's what I teach. Your men are trained to eliminate threats. Period. They don't have the choice I have, because they've been conditioned to default to maximum force. If I taught them my techniques without teaching them the philosophy behind it, I'd just be creating more efficient weapons. I won't do that. Morrison, who'd been silent, spoke up. His voice was hoarse but clear. Mr. Lee, you said you teach people when not to use violence. Can you teach us that? Bruce looked at him with something approaching respect. What you need to learn isn't something I can teach in a few seminars. It takes years. It requires you to question everything you've been taught about strength and power. It means accepting that the strongest person in a room isn't the one who can destroy everything, but the one who can destroy everything and chooses not to. He paused. Most warriors never learn that lesson because they're too afraid to look weak. Are you willing to look weak? Morrison didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet, honest. I don't know. That's the right answer, Bruce said. Honesty is where it starts. Commander Jenkins watched Bruce Lee walk toward the exit and felt the future slipping through his fingers. In 11 seconds, a 140-pound martial artist had just dismantled the Navy's best hand-to-hand combat instructor, and then refused a contract that would have changed modern warfare. Jenkins had seen many things in 30 years of military service, but he'd never seen someone turn down power when it was freely offered. The gym remained silent after Bruce declined the contract. The 7 officers exchanged glances, uncertain how to proceed. This wasn't how these consultations usually went. Civilians brought in for military demonstrations typically fell into 2 categories: those who got humbled quickly and left quietly, or those who impressed the brass and eagerly signed lucrative contracts. Bruce Lee had done neither. He'd dominated completely, then walked away from the opportunity that dominance had created. Commander Jenkins wasn't accustomed to being told no. His career had been built on identifying assets, acquiring them, and deploying them effectively. Bruce Lee was clearly an asset, perhaps the most valuable combat instructor Jenkins had encountered in decades. The precision, the efficiency, the almost supernatural ability to read and control an opponent. These were capabilities that could save lives, win battles, change outcomes. And Bruce was refusing. Mr. Lee, Jenkins said, his voice carrying the weight of command, but also a note of genuine curiosity. I need to understand your position. You've just demonstrated capabilities that could protect American servicemen. Young men, barely out of their teens, going into combat situations where hand-to-hand fighting could mean the difference between life and death. You could give them an edge. You could bring them home alive. And you're saying no because of philosophy? Bruce turned back, his expression patient but firm. Commander, may I ask you a question? Jenkins nodded. When your men go into combat, what are they fighting for? For their country, for their brothers in arms, for freedom. And when they kill, what are they killing? Jenkins frowned. The enemy. Threats. Combatants. No, Bruce said quietly. They're killing human beings. People with families, histories, fears, dreams. Your training reduces those people to threats and targets because that's necessary for your men to function. I understand that. War requires that dehumanization, but it also damages the warriors who do it. He stepped back toward the center of the gym, his movements unhurried. I've met many combat veterans, good men, brave men, who carry the weight of what they've done. They followed orders, they served honorably, they did what was necessary. But many of them are haunted, not because they were weak, but because they were human. Because somewhere deep inside, they know that every person they killed was a choice, even if that choice was made for them by circumstances, by orders, by necessity. Morrison, still leaning against the wall, recovering, spoke up. So what's your alternative? We just let the enemy kill us while we philosophize about the value of human life. No, Bruce said. You fight when fighting is necessary. You kill when killing is necessary. But you know the difference between necessary and unnecessary. And that knowledge, that discrimination, that's what I teach. Not just technique, but judgment. He looked around the room, meeting each officer's eyes. Your training creates efficient killers. My training creates conscious warriors. There's a difference. A killer reacts. Threat appears. Threat gets eliminated. A warrior responds. Threat appears. Warrior evaluates. Warrior chooses the minimum force necessary to resolve the situation. Sometimes that's lethal force. Sometimes it's not. But it's always a choice made with full awareness. Captain Thomas Webb, a Marine officer who'd been silent until now, leaned forward in his chair. Mr. Lee, with respect, we're not training for bar fights or self-defense scenarios. We're training for war. In war, there's no time for evaluation and conscious choice. You have milliseconds to act. Hesitation gets you killed. You're confusing consciousness with hesitation, Bruce replied. They're not the same. When I fought Chief Morrison just now, I wasn't hesitating. I was completely present, completely aware, completely responsive. I made dozens of choices in those 11 seconds. Where to move, when to strike, how hard to strike, when to stop. All conscious choices made faster than thought because my training has made consciousness automatic. He gestured toward Morrison. He was also making choices, but unconsciously. His training took over, close distance, overwhelm with aggression, finish quickly. That's what he's been conditioned to do. It's effective against most opponents. But against someone who's trained to remain conscious under pressure, his unconscious patterns became predictable, readable, exploitable. Morrison pushed off the wall, his leg now responding normally. So you're saying my training made me weaker? I'm saying your training made you effective for certain scenarios and limited for others. In a jungle firefight, your conditioning is perfect. But in ambiguous situations, checkpoints, civilian areas, potential threats that might not be threats, your default to maximum force creates problems. Collateral damage, innocent casualties, hearts and minds lost. The room fell silent. Bruce had just articulated something the military had been struggling with throughout the Vietnam War. The difficulty of fighting an unconventional war where distinguishing friend from foe was often impossible, where maximum violence frequently backfired, where winning battles but losing the war had become the norm. Commander Jenkins rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. Mr. Lee, everything you're saying makes sense philosophically. But philosophically enlightened warriors aren't what wins wars. Aggressive, well-trained, highly motivated killers, that's what wins wars. Does it? Bruce asked softly. How's Vietnam going, Commander? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Several officers stiffened. Questioning the war effort, even implicitly, bordered on insubordination from military personnel. But Bruce was a civilian. He could ask questions they couldn't. Jenkins's jaw tightened. That's a complex situation with political dimensions beyond the scope of this conversation. Is it? Bruce pressed, his tone remaining respectful but insistent. Or is it the inevitable result of applying maximum violence to situations that require discrimination and judgment? You're fighting an enemy you can't identify, in a population you can't distinguish from combatants, using tactics designed for conventional warfare. More killing hasn't brought you closer to victory. It's created more enemies. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm not criticizing your men. They're doing what they've been trained to do, following orders, serving honorably. But the training itself, the conditioning to default to maximum force, that's contributing to the problem. And you want me to make that conditioning more efficient? To create warriors who can kill even more effectively? That doesn't solve the problem. It amplifies it. Lieutenant Marcus Harris, the Navy corpsman, spoke for the first time. So what would you teach, if not more effective killing? More effective thinking, Bruce said immediately. I'd teach your men to read situations with the same precision they currently use to read opponents. To evaluate threats on a spectrum rather than a binary. To have a full range of responses available, from de-escalation to disabling to lethal force, and the judgment to choose appropriately. That sounds like police work, not military operations, Webb said. Modern war is police work. Bruce countered. Counterinsurgency, occupation, hearts and minds campaigns. These require police skills more than warrior skills. But you're sending warriors trained for conventional combat into unconventional situations and wondering why it's not working. Jenkins stood up, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. He walked to the center of the gym, standing a few feet from Bruce. Up close, the size difference was even more apparent. Jenkins had 6 inches and 80 pounds on Bruce. But neither man's body language suggested dominance or submission. They simply stood as equals, having a difficult conversation. "Mr. Lee," Jenkins said slowly, "I hear what you're saying. Some of it makes sense. Maybe a lot of it makes sense. But I have a job to do. I have men deploying to combat zones in weeks, months. I need to give them every advantage I can. Your techniques could save lives. American lives. That's my responsibility. Not philosophy, not the big picture, not questioning the mission. Keeping my men alive." "I understand," Bruce said, "and I respect that responsibility. So here's what I can offer. I'll consult on your existing training program. I'll help you refine techniques, improve efficiency, add elements of what I teach about reading opponents and controlling situations. But I won't develop a program focused purely on making your men more lethal. And I won't teach technique without teaching the judgment that should guide it." Jenkins considered this. It wasn't the comprehensive training program he'd hoped for, but it was something, a foot in the door. Maybe once Bruce saw the quality of the men, the seriousness of their mission, the lives at stake, he'd reconsider. "That's acceptable," Jenkins said. "We'd want you to." But Bruce interrupted gently. "I have conditions. First, I teach the philosophy alongside the technique. You don't get one without the other. Second, I have veto power over how the techniques are applied. If I see them being taught in ways that contradict the principles, I walk away. Third, this is a limited engagement. I'll give you 6 months of consultation. After that, we reassess. If I think the military culture is incompatible with what I teach, I'm out. No hard feelings, but I'm out." Jenkins glanced at the other officers. Several nodded slightly. Morrison, still processing his defeat, nodded more definitely. "Agreed," Jenkins said. "When can you start?" "Next month," Bruce said. "I have film commitments, teaching obligations. But I can give you 2 days per month for the next 6 months. 12 days total. We'll see what's possible in that time." They shook hands, and this time the handshake felt different. Not the polite greeting of strangers, but the mutual acknowledgement of 2 men who'd found a way forward despite fundamental disagreements. As Bruce gathered his bag and prepared to leave, Morrison approached him. The SEAL's face was still flushed from exertion and embarrassment, but his eyes carried something else, curiosity, maybe even hunger. "Mr. Lee," Morrison said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you hit me, those 3 strikes, you pulled them. You could have done serious damage, but you didn't. Why?" Bruce smiled slightly. "Because hurting you wasn't necessary. I needed to demonstrate control and capability. I did that. Injuring you would have been gratuitous. Ego. Proving something I don't need to prove. But in a real fight, on the street or in combat, you wouldn't pull them." "Depends," Bruce said. "If someone's trying to kill me or hurt someone I'm protecting, then yes, I use whatever force is necessary, including lethal force. But most confrontations aren't life or death. Most can be resolved with less. The problem is that people don't train for less. They only train for maximum. So maximum becomes their only option." Morrison nodded slowly, absorbing this. "You said something during the fight. You said I was fighting from fear. I've been thinking about that. What should I be fighting from?" Bruce was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "You should be fighting from center, from balance. Not for yourself. That's fear, and not for others. That's attachment. Just being present with what is, responding appropriately. When you fight for yourself, you become contracted, defensive, reactive. When you fight from center, you become expansive, responsive, creative. You have access to all possibilities, not just the ones your conditioning is programmed." "How do I learn that?" "The same way you learn to fight, practice. Thousands of hours of practice, but different practice. Not just drilling techniques, but training awareness. Learning to observe yourself under pressure. Catching the fear response before it takes over. Choosing your response rather than defaulting to conditioning. Morrison extended his hand. Bruce shook it. "Thank you," Morrison said, "for not hurting me worse than you did, and for showing me there's something I don't know." "That's where all real learning starts," Bruce said. "Recognizing ignorance. Most people never get there. Their ego protects them from it. You got there tonight. That's valuable." Bruce left then, escorted by the same junior officer who'd brought him. The gym door closed behind him, and the 8 military men stood in silence, processing what they'd witnessed. Commander Jenkins looked at his assembled officers. "Thoughts?" Captain Webb spoke first. "He's right about Vietnam. We all know it, even if we can't say it publicly. We're losing because we're applying the wrong kind of force. More of the wrong thing doesn't become the right thing." "Agreed," said another officer, a Navy captain named Reeves. "But can we afford to wait years for philosophical training to take effect? We have men in the field now." "That's the tension," Jenkins said. "Short-term effectiveness versus long-term evolution. We need both." Morrison, who'd been silent, spoke up. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted. Bruce Lee just showed us something we're not ready for. The technique was impressive, but that's not what matters. What matters is that he's operating from a completely different paradigm. He's not better at what we do. He's doing something different entirely. And we can't learn it in 6 months of consultation. It would require fundamentally rethinking how we train, what we train for, what we believe strength is." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I want to learn from him. Whatever he's willing to teach, I want to learn it. But I'm not naive. The military isn't going to transform because one martial artist showed up and won a sparring match. Institutions don't work that way. But individuals can transform. And if enough individuals transform, maybe eventually the institution follows. That's the best we can hope for." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Okay, Morrison, you'll be the primary liaison with Bruce Lee during his consultation period. Document everything he teaches, not just the techniques, the philosophy, the approach, the way he thinks about combat. We may not be ready for it now, but someone down the line might be. Let's preserve it." "Yes, sir." The meeting broke up. Officers filed out, heading back to their regular duties, their regular lives, their regular assumptions about how the world worked. But something had shifted. A seed had been planted. Whether it would grow or wither, no one could say. Morrison stayed behind, alone in the gym. He walked to the center of the floor, to the spot where he'd gone down on one knee 11 seconds into a fight he'd been certain he would win. He replayed the sequence in his mind. His attacks, Bruce's responses, the clinical precision of those 3 strikes. He'd been fighting his whole adult life. He'd survived 3 tours in Vietnam. He'd trained hundreds of warriors. And tonight, in 11 seconds, he'd learned that he didn't understand fighting at all. Not really. He understood techniques, tactics, applications of force. But he didn't understand the consciousness underneath technique, the awareness that made someone like Bruce Lee not just effective, but transcendent. For the first time in years, John Morrison felt like a beginner. It was uncomfortable. It was humbling. It was also exhilarating. He had so much to learn. John Morrison's journal, March 3rd, 1970, 2 weeks after the fight. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see Bruce Lee's hand touching my throat. Not hitting, touching. Like he was reminding me of something I've forgotten. That my life is always one choice away from ending. And usually that choice isn't mine. Except with Bruce, it was his choice. He chose to let me live. I've killed men who never got that choice. What does that make me?" The journal sat open on Morrison's desk in his small quarters at Camp Pendleton. Outside, the California sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside, Morrison stared at the words he'd just written, wondering if putting these thoughts on paper was wise. Wondering if they bordered on something the Navy psychologist would flag as concerning. But he needed to process what had happened. Needed to understand the crack that had appeared in his worldview. For 2 weeks, he'd gone through the motions of his regular duties, teaching hand-to-hand combat to SEAL candidates, running training scenarios, maintaining the appearance of the confident, competent instructor everyone expected him to be. But inside, everything felt different, uncertain, like he'd been operating from a map that he'd just discovered was missing crucial details. He picked up his pen again. Bruce is coming back next week for the first consultation session. Commander Jenkins assigned me as primary liaison. I'm supposed to document everything, extract the techniques, figure out how to integrate his methods into our curriculum. But I don't think techniques are what matter. It's something else. Something I don't have words for yet. A knock on his door interrupted his writing. Morrison closed the journal quickly, sliding it into his desk drawer. Come in. The door opened, revealing a young SEAL candidate Morrison recognized, Brennan, one of the sharper students in the current training cycle. Early 20s, athletic build, intelligent eyes that actually seemed to absorb instruction rather than just endure it. Chief Morrison, sorry to disturb you. You have a minute. Morrison gestured to the chair across from his desk. What's on your mind, Brennan? The younger man sat, looking uncomfortable. I heard something, rumor going around, that you sparred with Bruce Lee a couple weeks back. That you didn't win. Morrison almost smiled. Military gossip traveled at the speed of light, even when it was supposed to be classified. Someone had talked. Probably one of the junior officers who'd been in the gym. Maybe one of the medical staff. Didn't matter. Where'd you hear that? Around. Is it true? Morrison studied Brennan for a long moment, weighing how to respond. The official line was that the consultation had been routine, productive, nothing remarkable. But looking at Brennan's face, the genuine curiosity, the absence of judgment, Morrison decided on honesty. It's true. We sparred. Full contact. You put me down in about 11 seconds. Brennan's eyes widened. 11 seconds? But you've trained us. You're one of the best hand-to-hand instructors in the Navy. Apparently not, Morrison said quietly. Or at least, not compared to Bruce Lee. He operated on a different level. Different understanding of combat. Different approach, different consciousness, I guess. Consciousness. Morrison leaned back in his chair, considering how to explain something he was still trying to understand himself. Most fighting is unconscious. You train techniques until they become automatic. Then you let that automation take over in combat. Muscle memory, pattern recognition, conditioned responses. That's what we teach here. That's what I've been doing for years. And it works. Against most opponents, that approach is effective. He paused, but Bruce wasn't unconscious. He was completely aware, completely present, making conscious choices in real time faster than my unconscious conditioning could react. It wasn't that his techniques were better, though they were. It was that he was awake in a way I wasn't, and that made all the difference. Brennan absorbed this, his brow furrowed. Can that be taught? Being awake or whatever? I don't know, Morrison admitted. Bruce is coming back next week. I'm hoping to find out. But Brennan, why are you asking? What are you really after here? The younger man was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Chief, I've been through all the training. Hell Week, dive phase, land warfare, the whole pipeline. I can shoot, swim, navigate, breach, demolish. I am technically proficient. But sometimes I wonder if technical proficiency is enough. If there's something deeper that separates good operators from great ones. And it sounds like Bruce Lee has that something. Morrison felt a flash of recognition. This was exactly the hunger he was feeling. The sense that there was another level of capability, another dimension of warriorship that the standard training didn't touch. You want to meet him? Brennan's face lit up. Is that possible? I'll ask. No promises. But if he's willing, I'll set something up. Fair warning, though. He'll challenge everything you think you know. You okay with that? Honestly, Chief, I'm hoping for it. After Brennan left, Morrison sat alone with his thoughts. The sun had fully set now, and his quarters were dark except for the desk lamp. He pulled out his journal again, opened to a fresh page. Brennan came by tonight. Kid sharp, asking the right questions. Makes me think I'm not the only one who feels like something's missing from the training. Like we're teaching people to be very good at a narrow definition of combat, but not preparing them for the reality of violence, which is messy, ambiguous, psychologically complex. Bruce talks about consciousness, about being awake, about making choices rather than running on conditioning. That should be part of training. Not just how to break someone's arm, but when to break someone's arm, when not to break someone's arm. The discrimination between necessary and unnecessary violence. We don't teach that. We teach technique and aggression and mission focus. We create warriors who are very effective at one thing: overwhelming force. But the modern battlefield, Vietnam, counterinsurgency, hearts and minds, requires warriors who can modulate force, who can be dangerous without being destructive, who can control situations without dominating them. Bruce has that. I need to learn it, and I need to figure out how to pass it on. March 15th, 1970. Bruce Lee's first consultation session. The same gym at Camp Pendleton, but a different atmosphere. This time, instead of 8 senior officers, there were 20 SEAL candidates and instructors. Commander Jenkins had decided to make the consultation more practical. Less demonstration, more instruction. Bruce would spend the day teaching, showing techniques, answering questions. Morrison would document everything. Bruce arrived at 0800, wearing the same simple black pants and gray t-shirt he'd worn for the fight. He looked around at the assembled warriors, all of them young, fit, dangerous men with the confidence that came from having survived one of the world's most demanding training programs. "Good morning," Bruce said, his voice calm and clear. "Before we begin, I want to establish something. I'm not here to teach you how to fight. You already know how to fight. You've been trained by excellent instructors and proven techniques. What I'm here to do is introduce you to a different way of thinking about combat, a different relationship with violence. Whether that's useful to you or not, that's for you to decide." He gestured to the center of the gym floor. "I need a volunteer, someone who considers themselves good at hand-to-hand combat." Several hands went up immediately. SEAL candidates didn't lack confidence. Bruce scanned the group, then pointed to a stocky man in his mid-20s with wrestler's build and cauliflower ears. "You, what's your name?" "Rodriguez, sir." "Don't call me sir. I'm not." Bruce's response was different this time. Instead of stopping the takedown, he moved with it, redirecting Rodriguez's momentum while maintaining his own balance. Rodriguez got the leg, but Bruce's weight was already shifting, his free leg hooking behind Rodriguez's base. They went down together, but Bruce controlled the fall, landing in a dominant position with Rodriguez's arm trapped. Another 3 seconds. "Okay," Bruce said, standing again. "One more time, and this time I want you to think instead of just react. What are you trying to accomplish?" Rodriguez thought for a moment. "Get you on the ground where I can control you." "Why?" "Because that's where my advantage is." But you're assuming I'll fight your game. What if I don't? What if every time you commit to a takedown, you're giving me an opportunity to control you? Then your strategy is actually giving me what I want." Bruce gestured to the assembled group. "This is the first lesson. Most fighting is unconscious pattern execution. You learn techniques, you drill them, you develop responses that become automatic. Rodriguez is very good at wrestling, but his wrestling works best against other wrestlers or against people who don't understand grappling, against someone who understands the principles underneath the techniques, who sees the intention before the movement. The techniques become predictable." He looked at Rodriguez. "You're not doing anything wrong. You're executing exactly what you've been trained to do, but your training has created patterns. Those patterns are readable. Once I read your pattern, I'm not fighting you. I'm fighting your conditioning. And conditioning is much easier to defeat than a conscious, adaptive opponent." Rodriguez nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Bruce addressed the full group. "Everything I'm going to show you today is based on one principle. Consciousness beats conditioning. Awareness beats automation. The warrior who can remain present and adaptive will defeat the warrior who relies on trained patterns, no matter how good those patterns are." He spent the next 2 hours demonstrating this principle in various contexts: striking, grappling, weapons defense, multiple opponents. Each demonstration followed the same pattern. A volunteer would attack using their trained techniques, and Bruce would neutralize them by reading the pattern and responding to it before it fully developed. It wasn't that Bruce's techniques were superior. It was that he operated at a different timing. He responded to intention rather than action, saw attacks forming before they launched, controlled opponents through position and leverage rather than strength. Morrison watched carefully, taking notes, trying to capture not just what Bruce did, but how he thought. The philosophy underneath the technique. During a water break, Brennan approached Bruce. "Mr. Lee, Chief Morrison mentioned you might be willing to answer some questions. Could I ask you something?" "Of course. Everything you're showing us makes sense when you do it. But how do we develop that awareness you have? That ability to read patterns and respond before they happen? Is that something that can be trained, or is it just natural talent?" Bruce smiled, clearly pleased by the question. "Both. Some people have more natural sensitivity to movement and timing, but everyone can develop it through proper training. The problem is that most martial arts training actually reduces awareness rather than developing it. How? Because it emphasizes drilling techniques until they become automatic. And automation is the opposite of awareness. When you're running on automatic, you're not present. You're executing a program. To develop real awareness, you need to train differently. You need to practice observing yourself under pressure, not just drilling techniques. He gestured to the center of the gym. "Here's an exercise. Stand here, facing me. I'm going to push you, just a simple push to your chest. Your job isn't to resist the push or counterattack. Your job is to observe what happens in your body the moment before I push. Can you feel your body tensing in anticipation? Can you catch the fear response, the defensive contraction? That's what you're trying to observe." Brennan stepped into position. Bruce raised his hand slowly, telegraphing the push. Brennan's body tensed visibly, shoulders rising, weight dropping into his heels, preparing to resist. "Stop," Bruce said. "You felt that, right? The tension?" "Yes. That tension is your conditioning. Your body preparing for conflict. It's automatic, unconscious, and it limits you, makes you slower, less adaptive, more predictable. Real awareness training is about catching that response before it takes over. Observing it, understanding it, and choosing whether to go with it or do something else." He pushed Brennan gently. Brennan resisted automatically. "Try again," Bruce said. "But this time, don't resist. Just observe the push, feel the force, let it move you. Don't fight it, flow with it." Bruce pushed again. This time Brennan tried to relax, letting the force move him backward. It felt wrong, counterintuitive, like losing. "Good," Bruce said. "You stayed conscious that time. You made a choice. Let the push move you, rather than running on automatic resistance. That doesn't mean letting the push move you is always the right choice. Sometimes resistance is correct. But now you're choosing, not just reacting. That's the difference." He addressed the full group again. Most combat training conditions you to react automatically. See threat, respond with program technique. It's fast, it's efficient, and it works against most threats. But it also makes you predictable and rigid. What I'm suggesting is that you add another layer, conscious awareness underneath the automatic responses. You keep all your trained techniques, but you develop the ability to choose when to use them rather than just defaulting to them. Morrison raised his hand. "Bruce, how does this apply in actual combat? In Vietnam, in the jungle, you have combat. In Vietnam, in the jungle, you have milliseconds to react. There's no time for conscious observation and choice. You either react or you die." "True," Bruce acknowledged. "In immediate life or death situations, you need automatic responses. That's what your training provides. But how often are you actually in immediate life or death situations versus ambiguous situations where you have to make judgment calls?" He looked around the room. Checkpoints, civilian areas, uncertain threats, rules of engagement decisions. These aren't pure combat. They're complicated situations requiring judgment. If you only have automatic responses available, you'll default to maximum force because that's what your conditioning provides. But with conscious awareness, you can assess, discriminate, choose an appropriate level of response. "That sounds like hesitation," one of the instructors said. "It's not hesitation," Bruce said firmly. "Hesitation is freezing because you don't know what to do. Consciousness is having multiple options available and choosing the right one for the situation. They feel similar, but they're opposite. Hesitation is paralysis. Consciousness is freedom." The session continued through the afternoon. Bruce taught specific techniques, trapping hands, centerline strikes, footwork, but always in the context of the underlying principles. Always emphasizing awareness over automation. Always returning to the central theme. Real mastery is about choice, not just capability. Near the end of the day, Commander Jenkins, who'd been observing from the side, approached Bruce. "Mr. Lee, this has been valuable. Very valuable. But I need to ask something directly. Can what you're teaching be integrated into our existing curriculum? Or does it require a complete rethinking of how we train?" Bruce considered the question carefully. "Honestly, Commander, it requires a significant shift in training philosophy. You can't just add a few techniques to your existing program and get these results. You need to restructure training to emphasize consciousness and adaptability rather than just technical proficiency. That's a major institutional change. I don't know if the military is ready for that." Jenkins nodded slowly. "I was afraid you'd say that. But here's the thing. I've been watching these men train for years. They're excellent at what they do. But I've also seen good men freeze in ambiguous situations. I've seen trained warriors make poor decisions under pressure because they defaulted to their conditioning rather than thinking. What you're teaching, this conscious awareness, that might be exactly what we need for modern warfare, even if it's hard to integrate." "Then my suggestion is this," Bruce said. "Don't try to change the entire institution. That's too big, too resistant to change. Instead, identify the individuals who are ready for this approach, the Brennans, the people who are already questioning, already sensing that something's missing. Teach them. Let them integrate it into their practice. Let them become examples. Over time, the institutional culture will shift as those individuals rise through the ranks. Cultural change happens slowly, from the bottom up, not top down." Morrison felt something click into place hearing this. That was the path forward. Not changing the Navy's training program, but changing individual warriors. Building a network of conscious fighters who would slowly, over decades, transform the culture from within. "Mr. Lee," Morrison said, "would you be willing to do some private sessions? Outside the official consultation? With individuals who want to go deeper into this approach?" Bruce looked at him, reading the hunger in Morrison's eyes. "Yes, I can do that. We'll start with you, Chief. You've already had the experience of being completely controlled. That's a good foundation, knowing what you don't know. We'll build from there." Morrison's journal, March 15th, 1970, after the session. 8 hours with Bruce Lee today. I took 30 pages of notes. Technical details, principles, training methods. But the notes feel inadequate. They capture what he said, but not what he meant. Not the understanding underneath the words. Well, I'm starting to realize Bruce isn't teaching techniques. He's teaching a way of being, a relationship with violence that's fundamentally different from what the military cultivates. We create warriors who are weapons, point them at a target, they destroy the target. Efficient, reliable, consistent. But Bruce is pointing towards something else. Warriors who are conscious agents, capable of maximum destruction but not defined by it, who can access violence without being consumed by it. That's a missing piece. We train people to be violent, but we don't train them to return from violence, to integrate it without letting it dominate their identity. Bruce has integrated violence completely. He can access it instantly, use it precisely, then release it just as quickly. There's no residue, no trauma, no psychological weight. He's mastered violence by transcending the need for it. I'm not there, not even close, but I can see the path now, and I'm going to walk it, no matter how long it takes. Brennan asked me after the session if he could train with me privately. Kid's hungry. I said yes. Maybe I can pass on what Bruce is teaching me. Maybe that's my role in this. Not to become Bruce Lee, but to be a bridge between his approach and the military world. To translate his philosophy into a language warriors can understand and apply. It's a start. 6 months later, September 1970. Commander Jenkins sat in his office at Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters, reading Morrison's latest consultation report. The document was thorough, detailed, exactly what he'd asked for. But between the lines, Jenkins could read something else. Morrison had become a convert, not to a martial art, but to a philosophy. And philosophies, Jenkins knew from experience, were far more dangerous than techniques. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Jenkins's office, casting bars of light across his desk. He'd been in the Navy for 28 years, long enough to develop a sense for when something significant was happening beneath the surface of routine operations. And something was definitely happening with this Bruce Lee consultation. The official reports were positive. Bruce had conducted 6 two-day sessions over 6 months. He'd taught defensive tactics, demonstrated efficiency principles, introduced concepts of timing and distance that were more sophisticated than standard military hand-to-hand training. The SEAL candidates and instructors who'd participated rated the sessions highly. Several requested follow-up training. All good. All exactly what Jenkins had hoped for. But Morrison's reports contained something else. A subtext, a growing emphasis on conscious warriorship, ethical violence, the choice to restrain. Language that made the brass uncomfortable. Language that suggested questioning, hesitation, philosophical complexity in situations that required clarity and decisive action. Jenkins had received calls. Quiet calls from senior officers who'd heard rumors. Is Morrison going soft? Is this Lee character teaching our people to think too much? Are we creating warriors or philosophers? The questions irritated Jenkins because they missed the point, but they also worried him because they reflected institutional reality. The military rewarded aggression, decisiveness, confidence. It didn't reward nuance, reflection, or ethical complexity. Those qualities might be valuable, even necessary, but they didn't fit the institutional model of what a warrior should be. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Morrison entered, crisp in his uniform, posture military perfect. But Jenkins could see the change in him. 6 months ago, Morrison had carried himself with the coiled tension of a weapon ready to deploy. Now, there was something different, a relaxed centeredness, a quality of stillness that paradoxically made him seem more dangerous, not less. You wanted to see me, sir? Sit down, Chief. Morrison sat, hands resting loosely on his knees, spine straight but not rigid. Jenkins noted the posture. It was similar to how Bruce Lee stood, balanced, ready but without excess tension. I've been reading your reports, Jenkins said. Good work. Detailed, thorough. Bruce Lee's consultation has been valuable. The feedback from the training sessions has been consistently positive. Thank you, sir. But I'm hearing other things. Informal reports. Concerns from some of the instructors. They say you've been different. Teaching differently. Emphasizing restraint and consciousness over aggression and instinct. Some are worried you're sending the wrong message to candidates. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. May I speak freely, sir? Please. The instructors who are concerned are the ones who haven't trained with Bruce. They're interpreting what I'm teaching through their existing framework, and in that framework, restraint looks like weakness. But it's not. Restraint from a position of overwhelming capability. That's the ultimate strength. That's what Bruce demonstrated when he put me down in 11 seconds and chose not to hurt me. He could have. He didn't. That choice, that's more impressive than the technique. Jenkins leaned back in his chair. I understand the philosophy, Chief. And personally, I think there's value in it. But we're not training philosophers. We're training warriors who need to operate in the most dangerous environments on Earth. When a SEAL team hits a target, they need aggression, decisiveness, overwhelming violence of action. If we teach them to restrain, to think too much, to question whether maximum force is necessary, that hesitation could get them killed. With respect, sir, consciousness isn't hesitation. Bruce made that distinction very clearly. When he fought me, he wasn't hesitating. He was responding consciously at a speed faster than my unconscious reactions. He was more decisive than me, not less, because his decisions came from awareness, not conditioning. That works in a one-on-one controlled environment, Jenkins countered. But in actual combat, firefights, close-quarters battle, high-stress situations with multiple threats, there's no time for conscious awareness. You need automatic responses. Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. Sir, I've been in those situations. I've done 3 tours in Vietnam. I know what combat is. And you're right, in the middle of a firefight, You need automatic responses. Your training has to take over. But here's what I'm learning from Bruce. You can train automatic responses that include consciousness. You can condition awareness, not just technique. So when the shooting starts, you're not just reacting blindly. You're responding with full awareness, making micro decisions at speed that wouldn't be possible through pure automation. He leaned forward slightly. Vietnam is full of situations that aren't pure combat. Checkpoints, village searches, interactions with civilians who might be VC or might be innocent. Those situations require judgment, discrimination, the ability to assess and respond appropriately. Our current training doesn't prepare people for that. We train maximum force, period. And then we're surprised when that creates problems, civilian casualties, hearts and minds failures, situations that escalate unnecessarily. Jenkins rubbed his temples. Morrison was articulating something Jenkins had felt but couldn't quite express. The gap between military training and military reality. The difference between what worked on the range and what was needed in the field. Okay, Jenkins said finally. I hear you, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but I need you to understand the institutional reality. The Navy SEAL program has a specific culture, specific standards, specific expectations. If you push too hard against that culture, you'll get resistance. And not just from instructors, from the candidates themselves. They come here wanting to become weapons. They want to be hard, aggressive, unstoppable. If you tell them the real goal is consciousness and restraint, some of them will reject it. They'll see it as soft. Some will, Morrison agreed. Maybe most will, but some won't. The Brennans of the world, the ones who are already sensing that pure aggression isn't enough, they'll get it. And those are the ones I'm focusing on. I'm not trying to change everyone. I'm trying to reach the people who are ready. Jenkins nodded slowly. That was probably the right approach. Cultural change through individual transformation rather than institutional mandate. All right, Chief. Continue what you're doing, but be smart about it. Don't alienate the conventional instructors. Don't push the philosophy so hard that you create resistance. Teach the techniques, demonstrate the effectiveness, and let the people who are ready come to the philosophy on their own. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. Now, related question. Bruce Lee's official consultation period is ending. 6 months, 12 days, that was the agreement. Do you think it's been successful? Should we try to extend it? Morrison considered this carefully. He'd spent considerable time with Bruce over the past 6 months. Not just the official sessions, but private training, long conversations about philosophy and application. He'd come to deeply respect Bruce, not just as a martial artist, but as a thinker, a teacher, someone who'd achieved a level of integration that Morrison aspired to. The consultation has been extremely successful, Morrison said, but I don't think extending it formally would be useful. Bruce has given us what he can give within the institutional constraints. To go deeper would require changes the institution isn't ready to make. What would be more valuable is keeping an informal relationship. Let him consult occasionally on specific issues. Bring him in for private sessions with select individuals who are ready for advanced training. But don't try to institutionalize what he teaches. It won't work. Why not? Because institutions flatten complexity. They take nuanced approaches and reduce them to checklists and procedures. Bruce's approach can't be reduced that way. It has to be transmitted person to person, teacher to student, in a relationship that allows for deep exploration. You can't put consciousness in a training manual. Jenkins smiled slightly. You're probably right. Okay, we'll keep it informal. You maintain the relationship with Bruce. If opportunities arise where his input would be valuable, you coordinate. Fair enough. Yes, sir. After Morrison left, Jenkins sat alone with his thoughts. The consultation with Bruce Lee had succeeded in ways he hadn't anticipated and failed in ways he hadn't foreseen. They'd gained valuable technical knowledge, better striking methods, more efficient grappling escapes, improved situational awareness training. All good, but they'd also created a kind of philosophical virus. Morrison was infected. Brennan and several other candidates were infected. The infection was spreading, not rapidly, but persistently. A growing number of warriors who questioned the pure aggression model, who sought something more nuanced, more conscious, more complete. Jenkins wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Maybe both. What he did know was that something had been set in motion that couldn't be stopped. Bruce Lee had planted seeds. Some would grow quickly, some slowly, some not at all. But the ones that did grow would change things. Gradually, quietly, but fundamentally. That was probably the best they could hope for. October 1970. Private training session. Bruce Lee's home in Bel Air. Morrison sat in Bruce's backyard, a small Japanese-style garden with carefully raked gravel, simple plantings, a sense of deliberate calm. Bruce brought out tea, green tea, hot despite the California warmth, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The official consultation is ending, Bruce said. Not a question. Yes. Commander Jenkins is pleased with the results. Wants to keep an informal relationship, bring you in occasionally for specific issues. But the regular sessions are done. Bruce nodded. That's probably for the best. I gave the military what I could give within the limitations of the institutional structure. To go deeper would require changes they're not ready to make. That's exactly what I told Jenkins. Because it's true, Bruce said, smiling slightly. Institutions are like large ships. They turn slowly. You can't force them to change direction quickly without capsizing them. But individuals are like small boats. They can turn on a dime. So you change individuals, and eventually you change the institution. He poured more tea. You've changed, Morrison. I saw it the first day we met. You were hungry for something you couldn't name. Now you're finding it. Not just the techniques, but the understanding underneath. You're becoming a conscious warrior. I'm trying, Morrison said. It's hard. My conditioning runs deep. When situations get stressful, I default to aggression, maximum force, the programming I've developed over years. Catching that default before it takes over, that's the hardest part. Of course it is. That's the work. Catching the automatic response in the moment before it executes, and choosing whether to go with it or do something else. That takes years of practice. Decades, maybe. You don't master it quickly. How long did it take you? Bruce laughed. I'm still working on it. People think mastery is a destination. You arrive, and then you're done. But it's not. It's a direction. You're always moving toward greater consciousness, greater integration, greater understanding. You never fully arrive. The moment you think you've arrived is the moment you stop growing. Morrison absorbed this. It was both encouraging and daunting. Encouraging because it meant he was on the right path. Daunting because it meant the path never ended. I want to ask you something, Morrison said. About Vietnam. About killing. You've taught me a lot about consciousness in combat, about choosing the minimum necessary force, about restraint. But I've killed people. In tunnels, in villages, in situations where it was them or me. And I'll probably kill again. That's the nature of my job. How do I reconcile that with what you're teaching? Bruce was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but clear. I'm not teaching pacifism. I'm not saying killing is always wrong. In a life or death situation, where it's genuinely you or them, killing may be necessary. The question is, was it necessary? Or was it just the easiest option because that's what your training provided? He looked at Morrison directly. Most of the people you've killed, were they necessary kills? Or were some of them situations where you could have chosen differently if you'd had more options, more training in discrimination, more consciousness about the full range of possible responses? Morrison felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd asked himself this question before, late at night, when sleep wouldn't come and the faces of dead men haunted him. And the honest answer was complicated. Some were necessary, he said slowly. Guy with an AK pointing at my team, that's necessary. Him, or us, no question. But others, checkpoints where someone didn't stop fast enough. Villages where everyone looked like a potential threat. Tunnels where I heard movement and threw a grenade before confirming what the movement was. Those, I don't know. Maybe necessary. Maybe not. I'll never know because I didn't have other options available in the moment. Exactly, Bruce said. Your training gave you one option, maximum force. So in ambiguous situations, you defaulted to maximum force because that's all you had. That's not your fault. That's the training's limitation. But it's also why your training needs to evolve. You need to develop more options so that in future ambiguous situations, you can discriminate better. And if I discriminate wrong, if I choose restraint and it gets me or my teammates killed, then you made a mistake, Bruce said simply. But you made a conscious mistake, not an unconscious one. You chose based on your best assessment of the situation. That's all anyone can do. Well, I'm trying to save you from his unconscious killing. Killing that happens because conditioning took over and you weren't fully present for the decision. Because that kind of killing damages you psychologically in ways conscious killing doesn't. He poured more tea, the simple gesture somehow calming. When you kill consciously, when you're fully present for the decision, when you've considered alternatives and determined killing is necessary, you can integrate that. You can live with it. It's a choice you made for clear reasons. But when you kill unconsciously, when conditioning takes over and you execute someone without full awareness, that creates psychological fractures. Because part of you knows you weren't fully present. Part of you questions whether it was really necessary. That doubt festers. Morrison felt tears threatening. He'd never cried about Vietnam, never allowed himself to feel the weight of what he'd done. But sitting here in this peaceful garden, drinking tea with a man who understood violence better than anyone he'd met, the weight suddenly felt bearable. Like maybe he could examine it without being crushed by it. I have nightmares, Morrison said quietly. Not about the guys who are shooting at me. Those I can live with. But the uncertain ones. The maybe threats. The ones where I'll never know if I made the right call. Those haunt me. Because you weren't fully conscious when you killed them, Bruce said gently. You were running on programming. And some part of you knows that. It's trying to get your attention, trying to make you more conscious so you don't make the same mistake again. The nightmares aren't punishment. They're teaching. They're your psyche trying to evolve you. How do I stop them? You don't. You honor them. You acknowledge what happened. Accept your limitations of the time. Forgive yourself for being unconscious and commit to being more conscious going forward. The nightmares will fade when they've delivered their message. But you have to receive the message first. Morrison nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They sat in silence for a while, drinking tea, watching the afternoon light change the shadows in the garden. Finally, Morrison found his voice again. Thank you for teaching me, for being patient with me, for seeing something in me worth developing. You're welcome, Bruce said. But understand something. I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. You had the capacity for consciousness all along. I just helped you recognize it. Now your job is to develop it, refine it, and pass it on to others. That's how this works. Each generation teaches the next, and slowly, over decades and centuries, the level of consciousness in the warrior class rises. It's slow work, but it's necessary work. I'm training Brennan, Morrison said, privately, outside official channels. Teaching him what you've taught me. He's getting it faster than I did. Kid's a natural. Good. Brennan will teach others. And they'll teach others. You're building a lineage. It won't be recognized officially. It won't have a name or formal structure. But it will exist, a thread of conscious warriorship running through the military, passed down person to person, teacher to student. That's real legacy. Is that what you're doing? Building a lineage? I'm planting seeds, Bruce said. I don't know which ones will grow. I teach law enforcement, military, martial artists, actors, regular people looking for self-defense. Most of them just want techniques. Some want something deeper. Those are the ones I invest in. And I trust that the ones who really get it will pass it forward. That's all I can do. He stood, stretching slightly. I need to get back to training. I'm filming soon, a movie that might reach a lot of people. Maybe through film, I can transmit some of these ideas to a wider audience. We'll see. But Morrison, stay in touch. Come by when you need to. Bring Brennan. I'm always happy to work with people who are serious about this path. Morrison stood as well, bowing slightly, an instinctive gesture of respect he'd never made to anyone before. Bruce returned the bow. As Morrison drove back to Camp Pendleton, he felt different. Lighter somehow, despite having confronted the weight of his actions in Vietnam. Bruce had given him permission to be human, to have made mistakes, to be on a path rather than having arrived. That permission was worth more than any technique. His journal entry that night was simple. Talked with Bruce about killing today. about consciousness and necessity and the difference between them. Cried for the first time since I got back from Vietnam. Not tears of grief, tears of release. Like something that's been locked inside finally got to move. Bruce said the nightmares are teaching, not punishment. I think he's right. I'm going to start listening to them instead of trying to push them away. Maybe that's how you heal from war. Not by forgetting, but by remembering consciously. By honoring what happened and letting it teach you. Bruce is showing me how to do that. How to be a warrior who carries his actions consciously instead of burying them. It's hard work, but it's the right work. July 20th, 1973. Morrison was teaching a hand-to-hand combat class at Camp Pendleton when a young officer interrupted. "Chief Morrison, there's a phone call for you. They said it's urgent." Morrison's stomach dropped before he even picked up the receiver. Somehow he already knew. Bruce Lee was dead. The phone felt heavy in Morrison's hand, heavier than any weapon he'd carried in Vietnam. On the other end, Linda Lee's voice was steady but hollow, like she'd been crying for hours and had run out of tears but not grief. "John, I wanted you to hear it from me before you saw it on the news. Bruce died this morning. In Hong Kong. They're saying cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. He collapsed, went into a coma, and never woke up. He was 32 years old." Morrison's mind couldn't process the words. 32. Bruce Lee was 32 years old. Morrison himself was 34. They'd known each other for 3 years. 3 years that had changed Morrison's entire understanding of what it meant to be a warrior, what it meant to be conscious, what it meant to be human. And now Bruce was gone. "John, are you there?" "I'm here," Morrison managed. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Distant. "Linda, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say," Linda replied. Bruce lived more in 32 years than most people live in 80. He knew that. He told me once that he wasn't afraid of dying young. He was afraid of dying without having fully lived. He didn't die without living. He burned so bright. After the call ended, Morrison stood in the empty office, staring at nothing. Outside, he could hear the sounds of training continuing. Instructors shouting corrections, candidates grunting through exercises, the rhythmic impact of bodies hitting mats. The world kept moving as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Morrison walked back to his quarters, ignoring the questioning looks from passing personnel. He sat at his desk and opened his journal, pen hovering over blank paper. What do you write when your teacher dies? When the person who cracked open your understanding of reality is suddenly gone. Finally, he wrote, "Bruce Lee died today, 32 years old. The world thinks it lost a martial artist, an actor, a cultural icon. But I lost a teacher, a mentor, someone who saw something in me I didn't know was there and helped me develop it. Someone who showed me that strength and consciousness aren't opposites. They're the same thing at the highest levels." I keep thinking about our last conversation 6 months ago in his backyard. He said he was planting seeds, that he wouldn't know which ones would grow, that all he could do was plant with integrity and trust. The seed he planted in me has grown. It's still growing, and now it's my responsibility to tend it, to protect it, to pass it on. That's how I honor him, not by mourning, but by continuing the work. By becoming the teacher he showed me I could be. By passing forward what he gave me. I'm not ready for this. I want more time, more conversations, more training, more of his presence. But that's not how it works. Teachers appear when you need them, teach what you need to learn, and leave when their part is done. My part isn't done. It's just beginning. Bruce, wherever you are, thank you for seeing me, for teaching me, for changing my life. I promise I won't waste what you gave me. 3 days later, July 23rd, 1973. Morrison got permission to attend Bruce's funeral in Seattle. Linda had arranged for a private service followed by a public memorial, Bruce's friends and family first, then thousands of fans who wanted to pay respects. Morrison would attend the private service. The flight to Seattle gave him time to think. About the 3 years since Camp Pendleton. About the transformation Bruce had catalyzed in him. About the ripple effects already spreading through the SEAL community and beyond. Brennan was now an instructor himself, teaching hand-to-hand combat, with an emphasis on consciousness and discrimination that made the older instructors uncomfortable but produced exceptional results. Several other SEALs Morrison had trained were implementing similar approaches in their teams. The philosophy was spreading quietly, person to person, exactly as Bruce had predicted. But Bruce wouldn't see it continue to spread, wouldn't know how far his influence would reach, wouldn't witness the slow transformation of military culture that his seeds would eventually produce. The funeral was at Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, a peaceful place overlooking the city and water. Morrison arrived early, standing apart from the main group, not wanting to intrude on the family's grief. He watched as people arrived. Martial artists Bruce had trained, actors he'd worked with, students from his schools, friends from the Hong Kong film industry. And James Coburn, Steve McQueen, Chuck Norris, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the famous students who'd sought Bruce out not for his celebrity, but for his knowledge. They looked devastated. These were men accustomed to being the strongest people in any room, and they'd all found someone stronger. Now that person was gone. Linda saw Morrison and approached. She looked exhausted but composed, carrying her grief with dignity. "John, thank you for coming." "Of course." "Linda, if there's anything I can do—" "There is," she interrupted gently. "Keep teaching what Bruce taught you. He talked about you often. Said you were one of the few people who really understood what he was trying to transmit. That you were building something important in the military, a lineage of conscious warriors." He was proud of that. Morrison felt emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I'll keep teaching. I promise." "Good. That's how Bruce lives on. Through the people he changed, who change others, who change others. Seeds becoming trees, becoming forests." The service was simple but profound. Students spoke about Bruce's philosophy, his generosity, his intensity, his humor. Dan Inosanto, one of Bruce's closest students, talked about Jeet Kune Do, the style Bruce had been developing, or rather the non-style, the philosophy of combat that emphasized directness, simplicity, and personal expression. Bruce didn't want to create followers, Inosanto said. He wanted to create individuals. He wanted each of us to find our own path, our own truth, our own expression of martial arts. He showed us the way, then told us to walk it ourselves. That was his gift, not techniques, but liberation. Morrison understood. That's exactly what Bruce had done for him, shown him a possibility, then trusted him to develop it in his own way. No rigid system, no dogmatic adherence to specific methods. Just principles, consciousness, and the freedom to explore. After the service, Morrison stood by Bruce's grave for a long time. The headstone was simple, elegant. Bruce Lee, NOV. 27, 1940, July 20th, 1973, founder of Jeet Kune Do. Below that, in Chinese characters and English. Your inspiration continues to guide us toward our personal liberation. Personal liberation. That's what Bruce had offered. Freedom from conditioning, from limitation, from unconscious patterns. The freedom to choose, to grow, to evolve. That freedom was Bruce's true legacy, more important than any film or fighting technique. Morrison bowed, a final gesture of respect, and left. August 1973. Back at Camp Pendleton. The gym felt different now. Morrison had taught hundreds of classes in this space over the years, but since Bruce's death, everything felt heavier, more significant, like he was carrying a responsibility he hadn't fully understood before. He stood in front of 20 SEAL candidates, all young, fit, eager men who wanted to become weapons. Morrison's job was to shape them into exactly that, efficient, ruthless, capable of maximum violence. That's what the curriculum required. But Bruce had shown him another possibility. "Before we start today's training," Morrison said, "I want to tell you about someone I knew. A teacher. He died 3 weeks ago. Some of you might recognize his name, Bruce Lee." Several candidates nodded. They'd seen The Green Hornet, heard about Enter the Dragon, which would be released in a few weeks. But they didn't know the full story. "Bruce Lee was the most skilled martial artist I ever met," Morrison continued. "But that's not what made him exceptional. What made him exceptional was his consciousness, his ability to be fully present in combat, making conscious choices at speeds faster than most people's unconscious reactions. He taught me that real mastery isn't about technique, it's about awareness, about choosing your response rather than defaulting to conditioning. He paused, looking at each candidate. I'm going to teach you the standard curriculum. You'll learn strikes, grapples, weapons defenses, all the technical skills you need. But I'm also going to teach you something Bruce Lee taught me: how to remain conscious under pressure, how to discriminate between necessary and unnecessary violence, how to be dangerous without being destructive. Some of you will get it, some won't. That's fine. But for those who do, it will change not just how you fight, but how you live. One candidate raised his hand. Chief, with respect, isn't consciousness a liability in combat? Don't you want automatic responses, not thinking? Good question, Morrison said. And the answer is both. You need automatic responses for immediate threats, but you also need consciousness for ambiguous situations. Most of combat isn't pure life or death. It's complicated, messy, uncertain. You need the judgment to navigate that uncertainty. Bruce Lee had both: lightning-fast automatic responses and conscious awareness. That combination is what made him unbeatable. That's what I'm offering to teach you. The class proceeded with standard combatives training. But Morrison introduced small modifications. Exercises in observing tension before it became action, drills that emphasize control over destruction, scenarios that require discrimination rather than just maximum force. Most candidates went through the motions without really understanding. But a few, Morrison could see it in their eyes, got it. They were hungry for something beyond pure technique. They sensed that Morrison was offering access to a level of mastery they'd only vaguely imagined. After class, 3 candidates approached Morrison. One of them, a young SEAL named Rodriguez, no relation to the wrestler Bruce had demonstrated with, spoke for the group. Chief Morrison, is there any way to get additional training in what you were talking about? The consciousness stuff? I feel like I'm missing something fundamental in my martial arts practice and what you described. Sounds like exactly what I've been looking for. Morrison studied the 3 men. Rodriguez, plus 2 others, Chun and Martinez. All mid-20s, all technically proficient, all with something else in their eyes. The hunger Bruce had recognized in Morrison 3 years ago. The readiness to question, to explore, to go deeper. Meet me here tomorrow at 0500, Morrison said, before regular training starts. We'll work on it. But understand something. This isn't official curriculum. This is personal transmission, teacher to student. What I'm offering you is what Bruce Lee offered me: a path toward conscious warriorship. It's hard work. It requires questioning everything you think you know. And it never ends. You interested? All 3 nodded immediately. Good. Bring open minds and empty cups. If you come with your cups already full of assumptions and certainty, there's no room for what I have to teach. See you at 0500. After they left, Brennan emerged from the equipment room where he'd been organizing training gear. He'd been listening. You're building it, Brennan said quietly. The lineage Bruce talked about. Person to person, teacher to student. Trying to, Morrison replied. I don't know if I'm doing it right. Bruce made it look effortless, but teaching consciousness is harder than teaching techniques. How do you transmit something that can't be fully explained, only experienced? The same way Bruce did it with you. You put people in situations where their conditioning fails, where they have to become conscious or lose. Then you help them understand what happened. Repeat that enough times, and consciousness becomes automatic. Morrison smiled. When did you get so wise? I learned from a good teacher, Brennan said. Who learned from a better one? September 1973. Private training session, 0500. The gym was dark except for a few overhead lights Morrison had switched on. Rodriguez, Chun, and Martinez arrived punctually, wearing PT gear, barefoot, ready to train. Morrison stood in the center of the floor, posture relaxed but attentive. First principle, Morrison said without preamble. Everything you've learned about fighting is both true and incomplete. The techniques work. The conditioning is valuable. But it's not enough. You need another layer. Conscious awareness underneath the automatic responses. That's what we're here to develop. He gestured to Rodriguez. Step forward. I'm going to push you. Just a simple push to your chest. Your job isn't to resist or counter. Your job is to observe what happens in your body the moment before I push. Can you feel the tension, the anticipation, the defensive contraction? That's your conditioning preparing for conflict. We're going to learn to catch that response before it takes over. It was the same exercise Bruce had used with Brennan 3 years ago. Morrison was passing it forward, link by link, in a chain of transmission that stretched back to Bruce and would stretch forward to students he'd never meet. They worked for 90 minutes, not learning new techniques, learning to observe themselves, catching the automatic fear response, noticing how tension preceded movement, feeling the difference between unconscious reaction and conscious choice. It was frustrating work. The mind wanted to jump to technique, to application, to what do I do when, but Morrison kept bringing them back to observation. Don't do anything. Just watch. See what your body does automatically. Become aware of your patterns. By the end, all three were mentally exhausted in a way that physical training never produced. Chun spoke for the group. Chief, this is harder than Hell Week. Hell Week was just physical suffering. I don't even know what this is. This is learning to be present with discomfort without reacting to it, Morrison said. In Hell Week, you push through pain. That's valuable. But this is different. This is learning to be with pain, with fear, with uncertainty, without letting it control you. That's consciousness. And it's harder than any physical challenge because you can't just grit your teeth and endure. You have to actually observe, actually feel, actually be present. Most people never develop that capacity. Is this what Bruce Lee taught you? Martinez asked. This and more. Much more. Bruce could read intentions before they became actions. He could control space through presence alone. He'd integrated violence so completely that he'd transcended the need for it. I'm nowhere near that level, but I'm on a path, and I'm inviting you to walk it with me. They trained together 3 mornings a week for the next several months. Morrison taught them exercises Bruce had taught him, pushing hands to develop sensitivity, sparring with constraints to force consciousness over conditioning, meditation to develop the capacity to observe thoughts without being swept away by them. And slowly, they transformed, not just as fighters, as people. They became calmer under pressure, more aware of their patterns, more capable of choosing responses rather than running on automatic. Other SEALs noticed. Some were curious. Some were skeptical. Some openly mocked the consciousness training as New Age nonsense. Morrison didn't defend it. He just kept teaching those who were ready, trusting that results would speak louder than arguments. November 1973. Morrison's journal. 4 months since Bruce died. The grief has mellowed, but hasn't disappeared. I think of him often when I'm teaching, when I'm training, when I'm facing difficult decisions. What would Bruce do? How would Bruce see this situation? But I'm realizing that's the wrong question. Bruce wouldn't want me to imitate him. He'd want me to find my own expression, my own path, my own truth. That's what he meant by personal liberation. Not following his way, but discovering mine. I'm teaching Rodriguez, Chun, and Martinez. They're progressing faster than I did. Maybe because they're younger, more flexible, less burdened by years of contrary conditioning. Or maybe because I'm a better teacher than I realize. Bruce planted seeds in me, and those seeds are now producing fruit that I can share with others. I think that's how legacy works. Not direct replication, mutation and evolution. Bruce taught me his way. I'm teaching my way, which was shaped by Bruce, but isn't identical to it. Rodriguez and the others will develop their ways, shaped by me, but unique to them. And on, generation after generation. The core principles remaining, but the expression constantly evolving. That's alive. That's organic. That's what Bruce meant when he said be like water. Not rigid, not fixed, but flowing, adapting, taking the shape of whatever container you're poured into while remaining fundamentally water. I miss him. I'll always miss him. But I feel him in my teaching, in my training, in my consciousness. He's not gone. He's just transformed from a person into a principle, from a teacher into a teaching. And that teaching will outlive all of us. December 1973. Commander Jenkins's office. Jenkins had called Morrison in for a performance review. Standard procedure, annual evaluation, assessment of teaching effectiveness, planning for the next training cycle. But Jenkins had something else on his mind. "Sit down, Chief. Coffee." "No, thank you, sir." Jenkins poured himself a cup and settled behind his desk. "Your performance reviews are excellent, as always. Candidates rate you as one of the most effective instructors. Completion rates in your classes are above average. Everything by the numbers looks great." He paused, sipping coffee. "But I'm hearing other things. Informal reports. You're running unauthorized training sessions. Teaching material that's not in the curriculum. Some instructors are concerned you're going off book, let's call it." Morrison kept his expression neutral. "Sir, the early morning sessions are voluntary. On personal time. I'm not interfering with official training." "I know, and technically, you're not violating any regulations. But Morrison, you're teaching consciousness, awareness, philosophical approaches to combat. That's not what SEAL training is about. We need aggressive, technically proficient warriors, not philosophers. With respect, sir, the two aren't mutually exclusive. The men I'm training are becoming more effective, not less. They're making better decisions under pressure, showing superior judgment in complex scenarios, demonstrating leadership qualities beyond their rank. That's all documented in their performance reviews." Jenkins sighed. "I know. That's why I'm not shutting you down. The results are undeniable. But Morrison, you're building something here that I don't fully understand. Something that exists outside official channels, outside institutional control. That makes people nervous. Sir, may I speak freely?" "Please." Morrison leaned forward slightly. 3 years ago, you brought Bruce Lee to Camp Pendleton to evaluate his methods. You saw what he could do. You tried to hire him to develop a training program. He refused because he said the institution wasn't ready for what he taught. He was right. The institution still isn't ready. But individuals are ready. And those individuals are becoming better warriors, more conscious, more capable, more complete. That's what I'm building. Not an institutional program, but a personal lineage of teacher to student transmission. It's not a threat to the Navy. It's an enhancement that works within the existing structure while adding something the structure can't provide on its own. Jenkins studied Morrison for a long moment. "You've changed, Chief. 3 years ago, you were a weapon. Highly effective, completely loyal, unquestioning. Now you're something else. Still effective, still loyal, but questioning. Conscious. I can't decide if that's better or worse. It's different, sir. Not better or worse. Different. And different isn't a threat unless you're rigidly committed to sameness." Jenkins laughed despite himself. "You sound like Bruce Lee. I'll take that as a compliment, sir." It was meant as one. Jenkins set down his coffee cup. "Okay, Chief. Here's how this is going to work. You continue what you're doing. The early morning sessions, the consciousness training, the personal transmission, all of it. But keep it separate from official curriculum. Don't push it on people who aren't interested. Don't create conflicts with other instructors. And document everything. Not for evaluation or oversight, for preservation. What you're building might be valuable long-term. Let's make sure it doesn't disappear if something happens to you." Morrison felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Just prove that this approach produces better warriors. That's all I care about, effectiveness. I don't care if you teach them to meditate or channel energy or whatever else Bruce Lee did. If it makes them more effective, I support it. If it doesn't, I'll shut it down. Fair. Fair." As Morrison left Jenkins's office, he felt something settle into place. Official permission, or at least official tolerance for what he was building. The institution still didn't understand it, but it was willing to let it exist in the margins. That was enough. Seeds growing in the cracks. That's how Bruce had described it. The institution was concrete, hard, rigid, resistant to change. But seeds could grow in the cracks, breaking through gradually, patiently, inevitably. Morrison was planting seeds. Some are already sprouting. In time, years, decades, they'd break through the concrete completely. And by then, the institution would have evolved enough to accept them. That was the long game. The only game that mattered. Bruce understood that. Now Morrison understood it too. And the work continued. 45 years later, February 2018, San Diego, California. An elderly man sat in a coffee shop overlooking the Pacific Ocean, waiting. His hands were gnarled with arthritis, his face deeply lined, but his eyes remained sharp, the eyes of someone who'd spent a lifetime observing, assessing, remaining present. John Morrison was 79 years old, and today, he was meeting someone who wanted to hear about Bruce Lee. I found Morrison through a series of connections that took 3 years to trace. A retired SEAL mentioned an instructor who trained differently, emphasized consciousness over aggression. That instructor mentioned Morrison. Morrison initially declined my interview request. Then, 6 months later, he called back. "I'm ready to talk," he said simply. "I'm old. The story should be told before everyone who lived it is gone." Now I sat across from him in this beachside cafe, recording equipment on the table between us, watching this weathered warrior decide where to begin. "What do you want to know?" Morrison asked, his voice gravelly but strong. "Everything," I said. "But start with the fight." February 1970. Camp Pendleton. You and Bruce Lee. Morrison smiled, a distant expression like he was seeing something 48 years in the past, but also present in this moment. "I was arrogant," he began. 3 tours in Vietnam. Highly trained. Combat Provence. I killed men with my hands. And then this movie actor, that's how I thought of Bruce then, just a movie actor, came in to demonstrate his martial arts. I was going to put him in his place, show him what real combat looked like. He sipped his coffee, the memory clearly still vivid. 11 seconds. That's how long it took him to completely dismantle me. 3 strikes to 3 nerve clusters, and my body stopped responding. I went down on one knee, unable to breathe properly, one leg numb, completely controlled. And Bruce had pulled every strike. He could have killed me multiple times. He chose not to. That choice, that restraint from a position of overwhelming power, that changed everything. Ow! Because I realized I'd been confusing violence with strength. I thought being a warrior meant being maximally destructive. Bruce showed me something different. That real strength is having the capacity for destruction, but the wisdom to restrain it. That consciousness, not just capability, is what separates masters from technicians. Morrison's eyes focused on me directly. Bruce Lee died in 1973. He was 32 years old. I'm 79. I've had 47 extra years to develop what he taught me in 3. And I'm still learning, still discovering layers I didn't see before. That's how deep his teaching went. It wasn't just techniques. It was a completely different paradigm for understanding violence, consciousness, and what it means to be a warrior. I leaned forward. "Tell me about the ripple effects. How did what Bruce taught you spread?" Morrison settled back in his chair, organizing his thoughts. "I started teaching differently. Not dramatically. I couldn't just throw out the standard curriculum. But I added elements. Exercises in self-observation. Training that emphasized discrimination over aggression. Private sessions with candidates who were ready for something deeper. And slowly, very slowly, it spread. Brennan was my first real student in this approach. He got it immediately. He's retired now, living in Montana, but he trained hundreds of SEALs over his career. Each one got exposed to these ideas. Some dismissed them. Some were curious. A few really absorbed them and passed them forward. Rodriguez, Chun, Martinez, they were my second generation of students. They went on to become instructors themselves. Then their students became instructors. And on and on. By now, I estimate thousands of special operations personnel have been exposed to this approach, either directly or through students of students of students. Did the military ever formally adopt Bruce Lee's methods? Morrison laughed, a dry sound. No, institutions don't adopt philosophies. They absorb them slowly through cultural evolution. But if you look at modern special operations training, you'll see elements that Bruce would recognize. More emphasis on judgment and discrimination. Rules of engagement training that stress minimum necessary force. Leadership development that includes emotional intelligence and self-awareness. None of that credits Bruce Lee, but it's all downstream from the seeds he planted. He paused, looking out at the ocean. That's how real change happens. not through institutional mandates, but through transformed individuals who slowly transform the institution from within. Bruce understood that. He knew he couldn't change the military directly, but he could change individual warriors who would change others, who would change the culture over decades. That's exactly what happened. What about you personally? I asked. How did Bruce Lee's teaching affect your life beyond the professional? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Bruce taught me how to carry violence without being consumed by it. I'd killed people in Vietnam. Some of those kills were clearly necessary, enemy combatants actively trying to kill me or my team. But others were ambiguous. Checkpoints. Tunnel situations where I defaulted to maximum force because that's what my training provided. Those kills haunted me. Nightmares. Guilt. The psychological weight that comes from taking lives you're not certain needed to be taken. Bruce helped me understand that the nightmares weren't punishment, they were teaching. My psyche trying to make me more conscious so I wouldn't make the same mistakes again. He taught me to honor those deaths by learning from them, by becoming more discriminating, by developing more options so future situations wouldn't force me into binary choices. That saved me. Psychologically, spiritually, maybe literally. A lot of Vietnam veterans didn't make it. Suicide, addiction, broken lives. I made it because Bruce gave me a framework for integrating violence consciously, for carrying what I'd done without being destroyed by it. Morrison's hands trembled slightly. Age or emotion, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. I've been married 42 years. 3 kids, 7 grandchildren. Successful career, honorable retirement, peaceful old age. None of that would have happened without Bruce. I'd have been another casualty, not in combat, but in the aftermath. Bruce saved my life. Not in that 11-second fight, but in the 3 years after, teaching me how to be human again. Later that afternoon, Morrison's home. Morrison had invited me to his house after the cafe interview, saying there was something he wanted to show me. We drove in comfortable silence, arriving at a modest ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood. Inside, the house was neat, lived in, decorated with family photos and military memorabilia. Morrison led me to a small study lined with bookshelves. He pulled out a cardboard box from a bottom shelf, set it on the desk, and opened it carefully. Inside were journals, dozens of them, leather-bound notebooks filled with handwriting spanning decades. I started keeping a journal the day after Bruce put me on the ground, Morrison said. Kept it up for 48 years. Documented my training with him, my teaching, my evolution as a warrior and a person. Everything's in here. He pulled out the first journal, opened to the first entry. February 18th, 1970. I could see the handwriting was shakier than later entries. The hand of someone still processing trauma. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because the story needs to be told properly. Not just the fight, the transformation. How one 11-second encounter rippled outward for decades. How philosophy spreads through personal transmission. How one man's teaching can change thousands of lives without ever being formally acknowledged. He pushed the box toward me. These journals document that process. My permission to read them. Copy relevant sections. Use them in your research. On one condition, tell the truth. Don't mythologize Bruce. He was human, flawed, complicated, imperfect, but he was also operating at a level of consciousness most people never reach. Both things are true. Tell both sides. I carefully picked up the first journal, feeling the weight of it. Not physical weight, but historical weight. This was primary source material documenting a hidden chapter of martial arts and military history. I'll tell the truth, I promised. The whole truth as best I can understand it. Morrison nodded, satisfied. Good. Now, there's one more person you should meet. If you're serious about understanding the full scope of Bruce's influence. 2 days later, a dojo in Oceanside, California. Morrison had arranged for me to meet Brennan, his first student in the consciousness approach. Brennan was 72 now, retired from the Navy, but still teaching martial arts part-time. His dojo was small, unpretentious, a simple training space with worn mats and minimal decoration. Brennan greeted us at the door, embracing Morrison with obvious affection. They had the easy camaraderie of people who'd shared something profound. "So you're the writer John's been talking about," Brennan said, shaking my hand with a grip that was still strong despite his age. "Writing about Bruce Lee's influence on military training?" "That's right." Morrison said you could help me understand how the teaching spread beyond his direct students. Brennan gestured for us to sit. Like Morrison, he moved with a quality of relaxed alertness, the physical signature of someone who'd integrated Bruce's principles deeply. "Morrison taught me, starting in 1970, Brennan began, changed my entire understanding of what combat was. I spent the next 30 years as an instructor, SEAL basic training, advanced tactics, leadership development. Officially, I taught standard curriculum. Unofficially, I wove in everything Morrison had taught me about consciousness, discrimination, restraint. How many students would you estimate?" Brennan thought for a moment. "Directly? Maybe 500 SEALs went through my courses. But many of them became instructors themselves. If you count second and third generation students of students, probably 5,000 people have been influenced by this lineage. Maybe more. And none of them know it traces back to Bruce Lee. Most don't. They just think it's good tactics, smart leadership, effective training. They don't know there's a philosophical lineage connecting them to a martial artist who died in 1973. But it's there. Invisible, but real. Like underground roots connecting separate trees into one forest." Brennan stood and walked to a wall where several photos hung. He pointed to one, a group of young SEALs in training gear, mid-20s, fit and confident. "These men trained with me in 1995. 4 of them are now senior officers, a captain, 2 commanders, a master chief. They're shaping policy, designing training programs, influencing the culture at institutional levels. And they carry Bruce's philosophy, filtered through Morrison, filtered through me, filtered through their own experience. It's mutated, evolved, adapted. But the core is still there. Consciousness over conditioning, discrimination over destruction, restraint as the highest expression of power." He turned back to face me. "That's how ideas spread in military culture. Not through official channels, but through personal relationships. Teacher to student, mentor to protege, one conversation at a time over decades." Bruce understood that. He wasn't trying to change the military as an institution. He was trying to change individual warriors, trusting they'd eventually change the institution. He was playing a game measured in generations, not years. "Did it work?" I asked. "Has the military actually changed?" Morrison and Brennan exchanged a glance. Morrison spoke first. "Yes and no. The military is still fundamentally the same institution. Hierarchical, resistant to change, focused on overwhelming force. But there are differences. Modern special operations training includes things that didn't exist in 1970. Cultural awareness, ethical decision-making, rules of engagement that emphasize discrimination, minimum necessary force doctrines. None of that explicitly credits Bruce Lee, but it's all downstream from the consciousness he introduced into the system." Brennan nodded. "It's also generational. The Vietnam-era warriors, most of them couldn't make the shift Bruce was advocating. Too much conditioning, too much trauma, too invested in the old paradigm. But their students could shift a little, and those students could shift more. Each generation integrates consciousness a bit more fully. Eventually, maybe another generation or two, Bruce's approach might become mainstream. But by then, no one will remember where it came from. Does that bother you?" I asked. "That Bruce won't get credit?" Morrison smiled. Bruce didn't want credit. He wanted transformation. He got it. That's what matters. March 2018. Final interview with Morrison. We met one last time at the same beachside cafe. Morrison wanted to add something he'd forgotten in our first conversation. Something important. "There's a dimension to Bruce's teaching I haven't fully explained," he said after we'd settled in with coffee. "It's not just about combat effectiveness or tactical superiority. It's about wholeness, integration, becoming a complete human being who happens to be a warrior, not a weapon that happens to be human." He looked out at the ocean, gathering his thoughts. "Most military training fragments people. You develop your tactical skills, but neglect your emotional intelligence. You strengthen your body, but ignore your psyche. You become competent at violence, but incompetent at peace. That fragmentation creates problems, PTSD, relationship failures, inability to transition back to civilian life, the epidemic of veteran suicides. Bruce's approach was holistic. He taught violence and peace as parts of the same continuum, not separate domains. He integrated physical training with philosophical development, tactical skill with emotional awareness. His students became more effective warriors and more complete humans. Those two things weren't in tension. They reinforced each other. Morrison turned back to face me. That's what I tried to pass forward. Not just better fighting techniques, but a path toward wholeness. Some students only wanted the techniques. Fine. But the ones who got the deeper teaching, they became different kinds of warriors. More effective in combat, yes. But also better husbands, better fathers, better leaders, better humans. They integrated their warrior identity with the rest of their life instead of compartmentalizing it. Is that possible? I asked. Can you really be good at violence without it damaging you psychologically? Yes, Morrison said firmly, but only if you approach it consciously. If you're unconscious, running on conditioning, compartmentalizing, suppressing emotions, violence damages you. But if you're conscious, fully present for your choices, emotionally aware, philosophically grounded, you can carry violence without being destroyed by it. That's what Bruce showed me. That's what I tried to pass on. He finished his coffee, signaling our conversation was ending. One last thing. You asked me in our first interview what Bruce Lee's legacy is. I've been thinking about that. His legacy isn't the films, though they're important. It's not the martial arts techniques, though they're valuable. His legacy is the possibility he demonstrated, that a human being can develop overwhelming capacity for violence while remaining fundamentally peaceful. That power and wisdom aren't opposites, but the same thing at the highest levels. That consciousness is the ultimate martial art. He showed that to a handful of people directly. They showed it to others. And now, 45 years after his death, thousands of warriors carry that possibility inside them, even if they don't know where it came from. That's immortality. Not being remembered, being perpetuated. Bruce's consciousness, replicated in thousands of people, spreading through military and law enforcement culture, slowly transforming how we think about violence, power, and warriorship. Morrison stood, extending his hand. I shook it, feeling the strength still present despite his age. Tell the story well, he said. Bruce deserves that. But more importantly, the warriors who carry his legacy deserve to know where it came from. They deserve to understand the lineage they're part of. That's what you're giving them with this book: context, history, connection to something larger than themselves. I'll do my best, I promised. I know you will. That's why I talked to you. Epilogue. June 2018. John Morrison died of a heart attack on June 15, 2018, 3 months after our last interview. He was 79 years old. His obituary mentioned his military service, his family, his long career as a martial arts instructor. It didn't mention Bruce Lee. But at his funeral, dozens of his former students attended: SEALs, Marines, law enforcement officers, martial artists. They told stories about Morrison's teaching, his emphasis on consciousness and discrimination, his insistence that real strength meant choosing restraint. Several mentioned that Morrison had fundamentally changed how they thought about violence, power, and what it meant to be a warrior. They didn't know they were describing Bruce Lee's philosophy, filtered through Morrison, adapted and evolved, but still recognizably the same core teaching. They just knew Morrison had given them something valuable, something that had made them more effective and more human. Morrison's widow gave me his journals, all 48 years of them. She said Morrison had left instructions that I should have them, that the story they contained needed to be told. I've spent the past months reading through them. 48 years of evolution, struggle, teaching, and integration. The story of one man's transformation from unconscious weapon to conscious warrior, and his decades-long effort to pass that transformation forward. But it's not really Morrison's story. It's Bruce Lee's story, told through Morrison's experience. It's the story of how one 11-second fight in a classified gym in 1970 created ripples that are still spreading nearly 50 years later. How one man's philosophy infiltrated the most powerful military in human history, not through official channels, but through personal transmission, teacher to student, generation after generation. Bruce Lee died at 32. He was world famous as a martial artist and actor. But his deeper legacy, his influence on military and law enforcement training, his philosophical impact on how America thinks about violence and warriorship, that remained hidden, invisible, passed down in lineages that didn't know they were lineages, transmitted by teachers who didn't know they were transmitting Bruce's teaching. Until now, this book is an attempt to reveal that hidden history, to trace the underground roots connecting thousands of conscious warriors back to their common source, to honor both Bruce Lee and the people like Morrison who dedicated their lives to preserving and spreading his teaching. The story isn't finished. Morrison students are still teaching. Brennan students are still teaching. The lineage continues, branching and evolving, adapting to new contexts while maintaining the essential core. Consciousness over conditioning, discrimination over destruction, restraint as the highest expression of power. In military training facilities around the world right now, instructors are teaching these principles to young warriors. Most don't know where the principles came from, but they're passing forward Bruce Lee's legacy nonetheless, keeping the teaching alive, spreading the consciousness he introduced into systems designed for unconscious violence. That's how transformation happens. Slowly, patiently, invisibly, one person at a time, one generation at a time, until the underground roots break through the surface and everyone can see the forest that grew from seeds planted decades earlier. Bruce Lee planted those seeds in 1970 in a classified gym at Camp Pendleton in an 11-second demonstration that 8 men witnessed and thousands were influenced by. The forest is still growing. And Bruce Lee, though he died at 32, is more alive now than ever. Not as a person, but as a principle, a consciousness, a possibility that continues to spread through every warrior who learns to choose restraint, to remain present under pressure, to integrate violence without being consumed by it. That's immortality. That's legacy. That's Bruce Lee's gift to the warriors who came after him, whether they know his name or not.